My brother looked me in the eye and said, "We need the basement suite back. Heather and I are turning it into a home gym." I was holding a bag of groceries I'd just driven 40 minutes to drop off for him. Chicken thighs, canned tomatoes, the specific brand of orange juice he liked since we were kids. He didn't offer to take the bag. "Sorry," I said. "You've been down there long enough, man. 3 years. It's time." Behind him, through the sliding glass door, I could see his wife Heather rearranging furniture in the living room. She didn't look up. That detail, the deliberate non-acknowledgement, landed somewhere specific, the way a small cut does when you're not expecting it. I set the groceries on his front step and drove home. Home at that point was still his basement, the one I had quietly been paying $1,200 a month for, directly to his mortgage lender, not to him. A distinction he either didn't understand or preferred not to think about too carefully. I didn't argue that evening. I'm not built for raised voices and slammed doors. My whole life I've been the one who absorbs things, turns them over, waits. My dad used to call it stubbornness disguised as patience. He wasn't wrong. What my brother didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I'd spent the last 3 years quietly building a file. Bank statements, wire transfer records, a shared line of credit agreement my brother had asked me to co-sign 2 years earlier when his renovation loan fell through. 47 pages of documentation, organized by date, cross-referenced by amount, because I'm an accountant and that's what we do. We document things before people have the chance to rewrite them. He thought he was asking me to vacate a basement. He had no idea I was about to stop holding up the ceiling above it. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is the shape of it. 36 years old, chartered professional accountant, oldest son in a family that treated reliability like a natural resource, something that simply existed, that didn't need tending, that you could extract from indefinitely without asking whether it would ever run out. Our mother died when I was 24. That's the before and after line in my family's history. Before, we were reasonably functional. After, my brother Trevor became the center of gravity somehow. The one everyone organized around, the one whose needs were loudest and therefore most real. I don't think it was intentional. Grief does strange things to families. It reshuffles hierarchies without anyone calling a meeting. Trevor is 4 years younger than me. After Mum passed, he struggled. Badly, genuinely, in ways I don't want to minimize. He dropped out of his college program. He went through a rough stretch with drinking that lasted about 2 years. He needed help and I gave it, which was the right thing to do. And I'd do it again without hesitation. The problem wasn't the helping. The problem was what the helping became after it was no longer needed. A habit my family kept. Long after Trevor was stable, long after he'd bought a house with Heather, long after they'd taken 2 vacations to Portugal and replaced the kitchen countertops with quartz. The problem was that nobody updated the story. In the version my family kept telling each other, Trevor was still the one who struggled, and I was still the one who held steady. Never mind that the holding steady was costing me something. Never mind that I hadn't taken a real vacation in 4 years because I was quietly covering a line of credit Trevor had stopped contributing to after month 3. Never mind that at 36 I was still living in a basement, because every time I tried to set aside money for my own down payment, something in Trevor's life needed it more. Nobody saw that, or they saw it and decided not to look directly at it, the way you learn not to look at something bright. The cosign request came in the spring, 2 years before he asked me to leave. Trevor and Heather had bought their house with a mortgage they could technically afford as long as nothing went sideways. Then something went sideways, a roof that needed full replacement, a furnace that quit in November. The renovation loan they applied for came back denied because Trevor's credit score had taken a hit from an old car loan he'd been slow to pay off. He called me on a Tuesday evening. Calm, reasonable, the version of my brother that's hardest to say no to. "I just need your name on the application," he said. "I'll handle the payments. You won't even know it's there." It was a home renovation line of credit, $60,000. I asked all the practical questions. Repayment terms, interest rate, what happened to the account if he missed payments. He had answers for everything. He'd done his research. He was responsible, he said. He'd changed. I believed him, because he had changed, mostly. Because he was my brother. Because our mum had loved him in that specific fierce way she had. And being near him sometimes felt like the closest thing left. I signed. For the first 8 months, he made payments without issue. Then they started arriving late. Then he called asking if I could cover 1 month, just one, while a contract payment cleared. I did. 1 month became 3. 3 became a pattern we stopped discussing, because discussing it made Heather uncomfortable, and Heather's comfort had become somewhere along the way a household priority that outranked my own financial exposure. By the time he asked me to move out of the basement, I had quietly covered 14 months of payments on a line of credit that was legally as much mine as his, protecting a credit score that I needed, and he had already damaged once. And he had not once, in any of those 14 months, acknowledged that I was doing it. He thought money moved on its own, the way things do when someone else is managing the paperwork. I left the groceries on his front step and drove back to the basement, and I sat at my desk for a long time without turning on the lights. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles in when you've finally reached the end of something. Not the dramatic quiet of a fight, but the still kind, the kind that comes when you realize you've been carrying a weight so long you forgot it wasn't your own body. I opened my laptop, pulled up the spreadsheet I'd maintained for 3 years, the one with every transfer, every covered payment, every expense I'd absorbed without announcing. I scrolled through it slowly, not with anger exactly, but with something clarifying. The way an eye exam corrects your vision, and everything that had seemed acceptably blurry suddenly snaps into focus. Total contributed to shared line of credit, $41,200. Rent equivalent payments made directly to mortgage lender over 38 months, $45,600. Informal loans to Trevor, documented in text messages he no longer thought I had, 11,000 and change. I wasn't keeping this spreadsheet to be vindictive. I kept it because I'm an accountant and numbers are how I make sense of things. But that night, for the first time, I let myself read it the way a stranger would. The stranger would have questions. Starting with, why does this person still live in a basement? I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Leslieville 2 weeks later. Top floor of a low-rise, east-facing windows. A small balcony where I could hear the street car on quiet mornings. The rent was more than I was used to paying, but it was mine. No shared walls with a brother-in-law's Peloton. No hearing Heather on conference calls above my ceiling. I signed the lease on a Thursday and didn't tell anyone in my family. I stopped covering the line of credit payments the same month. I didn't announce it. Didn't send a message explaining what I was doing or why. I simply redirected the automatic transfer and waited, the way you set down something heavy, and wait for the person who never noticed you carrying it to finally notice the ground. It took 19 days. My phone lit up on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner. Trevor's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 11 minutes later. And again. I listened to the voicemail the next morning with coffee. His voice was tight in the way it gets when he's trying to sound calm over something that's rattled him considerably. Hey, there's a notice from the lender. Something about a missed payment triggering a review. I think there might be a mix-up with the automatic transfer. Can you call me back? It's kind of urgent. I refilled my coffee and went to work. He texted that afternoon. What's going on with the account? The next morning. I need you to call me back today. That evening, from Heather's phone, which I hadn't blocked. Trevor is really stressed. Whatever is going on, can you just talk to him? I want to be honest about something, because this story isn't about enjoying someone else's difficulty. I didn't feel triumphant reading those messages. I felt tired, mostly. The specific tiredness of someone who held a door open for years and is finally allowing it to close. What I felt beneath the tired was something closer to clarity. The same clarity I'd felt reading my spreadsheet. The sensation of numbers finally adding up to the truth you'd been circling without landing on. My brother had never asked if I was okay. Not once in 3 years of late payments and quiet coverage and deferred plans of my own. Not when I told him I was putting off a down payment. Not when I mentioned once that I was feeling stretched. He nodded the way people do when they've already decided the conversation doesn't apply to them. That wasn't something I could fix with a phone call. The moment I stopped making excuses for him came on a Friday night, about a week after I stopped answering. My cousin Liam called, not to weigh in on the situation, but to let me know that Trevor had mentioned, at a family dinner I hadn't been invited to, that I was going through something and being difficult. That I'd moved out suddenly and gone quiet. Going through something, I said. His words, Liam said carefully. I asked if anyone at that dinner had asked what I might be going through. Liam was quiet for a moment. Not really, he said. It kind of moved on. I thanked him and hung up. I sat on my balcony for a while after that, watching the streetcar lights below. There's a particular pain in finding out your family has constructed a version of you that makes your absence their inconvenience and your presence their utility. I'm not sure I have a better word for it than that. But something settled in me that evening. The last hesitation, maybe. I'd been holding back, not from the legal action I knew was available to me, but from accepting that it had become necessary. I kept waiting for my brother to show up differently. To call and say something real. To demonstrate that somewhere underneath the entitlement there was still the person who used to sit with me in the backyard after Mum's funeral and talk until 2 in the morning because neither of us could sleep. That person might still exist. But he wasn't going to appear before consequences did. I called a lawyer the following Monday. Her name was Ms. Fontaine, a civil litigation solicitor in a firm near King and Spadina. Sharp, composed, the kind of professional who makes you feel slightly embarrassed for not having called sooner. She reviewed the cosigner documents, the payment histories, the text message record, the transfer documentation. "You've been covering this account for how long?" she asked, without looking up from the folder. 14 months. She looked up then. "And he's the primary borrower?" "Yes, and you co-signed under the understanding that he would be making payments." "He told me I wouldn't even know it was there." She made a note. "Right," she said. "That's a breach of the co-signer agreement, and combined with the documented payment history." She tapped the folder. "You have a reasonable claim for cost recovery. You also have the ability, as co-signer, to trigger a formal account review with the lender, which tends to get people's attention." It had already gotten his attention. I mentioned the voicemails. "Good," she said. "Don't respond to those yet. I want to explain something about co-signed credit agreements in Canada, because this is the part of the story where people sometimes say it's not believable. When you co-sign a loan or line of credit, you are equally and fully responsible for the debt. That's the standard. If the primary borrower defaults, the lender comes after you. Your credit is affected. Your wages can be garnished. Most people who co-sign for family members understand this in the abstract, but don't track what happens to the account afterward, because they trust the primary borrower is handling it. What most people don't know is that as a co-signer, you also have the right to request full account access, full payment history, and in cases of mismanagement, to trigger a formal review that can result in mandatory renegotiation of the debt terms. If the lender determines the account has been poorly managed, they can require immediate repayment arrangements or move to secure the debt against assets, including the property the renovation loan was tied to. Trevor and Heather's house. I hadn't wanted it to come to that. I want to be clear about this because it matters to me. I'm not a person who enjoys watching someone lose, but I am a person who spent 14 months protecting a co-signed credit line that was bleeding my savings while being told, by the person I was protecting, that I had overstayed my welcome in a basement I was indirectly subsidizing. I initiated the account review on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, Trevor had received formal correspondence from the lender. He called 17 times over the weekend. I answered on Sunday evening because I had decided what I wanted to say, and I'd learned by then the difference between reacting and responding. He answered on the first ring. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question exactly, more like someone reading off a charge. "I initiated a review of the co-signed account," I said. "Which is my right as a co-signer. You're going to tank our mortgage. Do you understand that? The lender is going to see." "The lender is already seeing it, Trevor. I've been covering your payments for over a year. They see that too." Silence. "I didn't ask you to do that," he said, quieter. "No, you didn't ask me to do a lot of things." Another silence, longer this time. "You can't just," he stopped. Started again. "Heather is pregnant." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. Of course there was one more piece of information designed to realign my responsibilities around his life. I felt something move through me. Not coldness, but steadiness. The kind you find when you've already made peace with a decision. "I'm glad," I said. "That has nothing to do with the account. It has everything to do with it. We need stability right now." "You needed stability 14 months ago too," I said. "I provided it." Nobody said thank you. He had no answer for that. Or rather, the answer he had wasn't one he was prepared to say out loud. "I need you to drop the review," he said finally. "I need you to sit down with Miss Fontaine and work out a repayment structure," I said. "Those are the terms." I gave him her contact information and ended the call. He didn't call back that night, or the next day. On Tuesday, his lawyer contacted mine. That detail mattered to me, in the same way the meeting request through attorneys had mattered in other stories I'd heard. It meant he finally understood. This wasn't personal anymore in the way he wanted it to be personal. He couldn't manage it with guilt or history or the image of our mother's face. It had moved into a different register. The register where signatures matter more than feelings. The next 2 weeks were the quietest of my life. I went to work. I ate meals on my balcony. I listened to the city in the morning. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't call relatives with my side of things. Revenge, if you want to call it that, is most effective when it doesn't announce itself. I heard about the fallout through Liam, who was kind enough to keep me informed without editorializing too much. The formal account review had triggered a lender assessment of the renovation line of credit, relative to the property's current mortgage status. Because Trevor had restructured his mortgage 6 months earlier in a way that increased his total debt load, the lender flagged the co-signed account as a risk factor. They requested a repayment plan within 30 days, or indicated they would move to secure the outstanding balance against the property, 30 days. Heather's maternity plans, which had apparently included extensive renovation of the second bedroom, quietly disappeared from her Instagram. Trevor's truck, which he'd financed 2 years ago in a move I had privately thought was reckless, went up for sale. I didn't feel good about any of this. I want to say that plainly. I'm not telling this story because I enjoyed the outcome. I'm telling it because I think a lot of people live in the version of this story where they absorb everything quietly and call it love. And eventually there's nothing left of them. We met in person 6 weeks after the lawyers got involved. A diner on Danforth that neither of us had any particular attachment to. Neutral territory, as my mother would have said, though she would not have recognized the context. Trevor looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He'd lost some weight. There was something stripped from his face that I hadn't seen before, a particular kind of confidence that I realized, sitting across from him, had always been partly borrowed from my stability, my reliability, my refusal to stop holding things up. He ordered black coffee. Didn't touch it. I need to understand how we got here, he said. I've been wondering the same thing, I said. For about 3 years, he looked at the table. I knew you were covering some payments. I didn't know it was that much. You didn't ask. You didn't say anything. I told you twice I was stretched. Once in February 2 years ago, once last October. Both times you changed the subject. He didn't dispute it. I appreciated that. There's a version of this conversation where someone spends the whole time insisting they misremember things, and I'd been braced for that version. His willingness to sit with it, even quietly, was something. The baby, he started, is not leverage, I said gently. I know that's not what you mean. But I need you to know I've already thought about the baby. I've thought about all of it. The review isn't about hurting you. It's about making sure the obligation gets acknowledged properly. That's it. He stirred his coffee without drinking it. Dad thinks you went too far, he said. Dad didn't know any of this was happening, I said. He didn't know I co-signed the account. He didn't know I was covering payments. He knew I lived in your basement and assumed it was because I hadn't gotten it together. Something shifted in his expression. He said that? At Christmas. 2 years ago. He set down his spoon. I watched him recalibrate. That moment when a person realizes the story they've been operating inside of has different dimensions than they knew. It's not satisfying exactly. It's heavy in a way that satisfaction doesn't cover. I didn't know he said that, Trevor said. I know you didn't, I said. But I'm also not sure what you would have done if you had. That landed the way I knew it would. Not cruelly, just accurately. The settlement we reached was reasonable. Trevor agreed to assume sole responsibility for the line of credit through a refinancing arrangement, removing my name from the account over a 12-month transition period. He also agreed to a formal repayment schedule for the covered payments, structured over 3 years, amounts he could manage without destroying his household. I didn't ask for interest. I didn't ask for anything beyond what was owed. Miss Fontaine reviewed it twice and told me I was being generous. You could push harder, she said. I know, I said. I don't want to push harder. I want this to be over. She nodded like that was the right answer. I think it was. The family response arrived in waves, the way it always does when something private becomes known. An aunt in Mississauga called to tell me that family shouldn't involve lawyers. I listened politely and pointed out that family also shouldn't involve co-signed debt being mismanaged for 14 months, and she didn't have a clean response to that. An uncle sent me a long text about how I should have just talked to Trevor directly. I replied that I had twice and included the dates. He did not respond. My father called on a Saturday morning. That conversation was the hardest one. He's 71. He doesn't fully understand credit agreements or co-signer obligations or formal account reviews. What he understood was that his sons were in a legal dispute and it felt, to him, like a failure of something fundamental. Your mother would have wanted you to work this out between yourselves, he said. I sat with that for a moment before I answered. Mum also worked herself to exhaustion for this family and never complained about it, I said. She taught me that by example. I followed her example for 12 years and nobody said a word. I need you to think about whether what you're asking me to do is to be like her or to simply be used up like her. A long silence. That's not fair, he said. I know, I said. I'm sorry, but it's true. He didn't agree with me. He's not there yet, maybe never will be. But he didn't push further, and somewhere in the space of what he didn't say, I heard something that might eventually become understanding. That was 8 months ago. Trevor and I don't talk often. When we do, the conversations are careful, like walking across ice you're not fully sure of. There are things between us that won't fully dissolve, I know that. Some damage reconstitutes as scar tissue rather than mending clean. I've made peace with that. Heather had their baby in March, a girl. I sent flowers to the hospital and got a short text back thanking me. It wasn't warm, but it was honest. And I've decided to value honesty over warmth for a while. The apartment in Leslieville turned out to be the best decision I've made in years. I have a proper coffee setup now, a French press and a small grinder, beans from a roaster on Queen Street. On Saturday mornings, I sit on the balcony with a book and let the city come awake around me. It sounds small. It isn't. After years of living underneath someone else's life, having a morning that belongs entirely to you is something I'd forgotten was possible. My cousin Liam took me for dinner last month and said, partway through, "I think you handled it right. I just want you to know that." I told him it didn't feel like handling it right. It felt like finally stopping something that should have stopped much earlier. "That's the same thing," he said. "Maybe it is." I've been thinking lately about the shape of how this all started, about why I stayed so long, covered so much, said so little. Part of it is personality. Part of it is being the oldest. The one who learned early that stability was your job. Part of it is grief, I think, the way losing my mother made me afraid to lose anything else, even things that had already quietly become losses. But part of it, and this is the part I sit with most, is that I confused endurance with love. I thought absorbing everything quietly was a way of showing up for my family. What I didn't understand is that absorbing everything quietly also teaches people that there are no consequences to treating you poorly, that your silence is permission. It isn't. The night my brother told me to vacate the basement, he thought he was telling me where I stood. What he actually did was show me where I'd been standing all along, and give me the final reason to move.